All right. The other America that followed the post-war boom. Let's go to the concepts. What effect did white flight have on America's cities, and why? Excuse me. Why were attempts at urban renewal viewed as less than successful? Okay, a couple of secondary vocabulary words for the day: urban renewal, braceros, and termination policy. Give a look over those. Here we go. The urban poor. One out of every four Americans was living below the poverty level. Many of these were elderly, single women and their children, or members of minority groups, including African Americans, Latino, and Native Americans. In the 1950s, millions of middle-class Americans, white Americans, left the cities for the suburbs, taking with them precious economic resources and isolating themselves from other races or classes. At the same time, the rural poor migrated to the inner cities, and between the end of World War II and 1960, nearly 5 million African Americans moved from the rural South to urban areas. The urban crisis prompted by the white flight had a direct impact on poor whites and non-whites. The cities lost not only people and business, but also the property they owned and income taxes they had to pay. City governments could no longer afford to properly maintain or improve schools, public transportation, and police and fire department, and in addition to that, the urban poor surface. While poverty grew rapidly in the decaying inner cities, many suburban Americans remained unaware of it. Some even believed that poverty could not exist in the richest, most powerful nation on earth. Each year, the federal government calculates the minimum amount of income needed to survive the poverty line or to be above the poverty line. In 1959, the poverty line for a family of four was $2,973. In 2000, it was $17,000. After living among the nation's poor across America, Michael Harrington published a shocking account that starkly illuminated the issue of poverty. Most African Americans, Native Americans, Latinos in the cities had to live in dirty, crowded slums. One proposed solution to the housing problem in the inner cities was called urban renewal. The National Housing Act of 1949 was passed to provide a decent home and a suitable living environment for every American family. This act called for the tearing down of rundown neighborhoods and constructing low-income housing. Later, the nation's leaders would create a new cabinet position, the uh, Housing of and Urban Development, or HUD, to aid in improving conditions in the inner city. Even though parking lots, shopping centers, highways, parks, and factories were constructed on some of the cleared land, there was seldom enough new housing built to accommodate all the displaced people. For example, a barrio in Los Angeles was torn down to make way for the new Dodger Stadium, and poor people who were displaced from their homes simply moved from one ghetto to another ghetto. Some critics of urban renewal claimed that it had merely become urban removal. Despite ongoing poverty during the 1950s, African Americans began to make significant strides toward lowering the reduction, uh, make significant strides toward the reduction of racial discrimination and segregation. Inspired by the African American civil rights movement, other minorities also began to develop a deeper political awareness and voice. Um, Mexican American activism gained steam after veterans returned from World War II, and a major change in government policy under Eisenhower fueled their protest. Many Mexican Americans had become U.S. citizens during the 19th century when the U.S. had annexed the Southwest after the war with Mexico. This is back during the 1800s. Large numbers of Mexicans had also crossed the border to work in the United States during World War I. When the U.S. entered World War II, the shortage of agricultural laborers spurred the government to initiate in 1942 a program in which Mexican braceros or laborers were allowed into the United States to harvest crops. Hundreds of thousands of braceros entered the U.S. on a short-term basis between 42 and 47. When their employment ended, the braceros were expected to return to Mexico. However, many remained in the U.S. illegally. In addition, hundreds of thousands of Mexicans entered the country illegally to escape poor economic conditions in Mexico. One of the more notorious instances of prejudice against Mexican Americans involved the burial of Felix Longoria. Longoria was a Mexican-American hero in World War II who had been killed in the Philippines. The only undertaker in his home in Texas refused to provide Longoria's family with funeral services. In the wake of this incident, outraged Mexican-Americans stepped up their efforts to stamp out discrimination. In 1948, Mexican-American veterans organized the GI Forum. Meanwhile, activist Ignacio Lopez founded the Unity League of California to register Mexican-American voters and to promote candidates who would represent their interests. Native Americans also continued to fight for their right and identity. In 1924, the Snyder Act granted citizenship to all Native Americans, but just as second-class citizens. In 1943, the Indian Reorganization Act moved official policy away from assimilation and and toward a Native American autonomy. Its message signaled a clear change in federal policy. In addition, because the government was falling into the Great Depression at the time, it wanted to stop subsidizing Native Americans. In 1944, they established the National Congress of American Indians that had two main goals: to ensure Native Americans had the same civil rights as white Americans had, and two, to enable Native Americans on reservations to retain their own customs. During World War II, over 65,000 Native Americans left their reservations for military service and war work. When the war ended, Native Americans stopped receiving family allotments and wages. Outsiders also grabbed control of their tribal lands, primarily to exploit the deposits of minerals, oil, and timber. In 1953, the federal government announced that it would give up responsibility for Native American tribes. This new approach, known as the termination policy, eliminated federal economic support, discontinued the reservation systems, and distributed their tribal lands among individual Native Americans. In response to the termination policy, the Bureau of Indian Affairs began a relocation program to help Native Americans resettle in cities. The termination policy was a bad failure. Although the Bureau of Indian Affairs helped relocate 35,000 Native Americans to urban areas in the 50s, they were too often unable to find jobs in the new locations because of poor training and racial prejudice. They were also left without access to medical care when the federal programs were abolished. In '63, the termination policy was abandoned. That's it for today. See ya.